In 1975, they invented the future. By 2012, they were bankrupt. This is the story of Kodak and why success can be the most dangerous thing a company ever builds. It's December 1975. A 24-year-old electrical engineer named Steve Sasson walks into a boardroom in Rochester, New York. He is carrying an 8-pound contraption made of spare parts, an analog-to-digital converter, 16 nickel-cadmium batteries, and a portable cassette recorder. When he points the lens at a subject, it takes 23 agonizing seconds to record a black-and-white 0.01 megapixel image onto the cassette tape. He places the device on the table in front of the executives of the Eastman Kodak Company. He has just shown them the future of human memory. He has just shown them the digital camera, and their reaction? They told him to hide it. There is a popular myth about Kodak. The story goes that they were a dinosaur, a company of out-of-touch executives who simply ignored the digital revolution until the iPhone came along and drove them into bankruptcy.
Authoritative touchscreen technology and the rise of mobile internet have analysts predicting a total shift in consumer behavior. It is the end of the traditional phone.
But the truth is far more fascinating. Kodak didn't fail because they missed the digital revolution. They invented it. By the time they filed for bankruptcy in 2012, they held over 1,000 patents in digital imaging. The real reason Kodak collapsed wasn't a failure of technology, it was a failure of economics. Because what Steve Sasson placed on that boardroom table in 1975 wasn't just a camera. It was a financial time bomb that would ultimately force Kodak to choose between committing corporate suicide today or delaying it until tomorrow. To understand why Kodak executives looked at the digital camera with horror, you have to understand how they made their money. For over a century, Kodak operated on the ultimate razor and blade business model. Gillette sells you a cheap razor so they can sell you expensive blades for the rest of your life. Kodak didn't care about selling cameras. Cameras were just the vehicle. The real money was in the film, the chemicals, the photographic paper, and the economics of that blade were staggering. Throughout the late 20th century, Kodak essentially held a monopoly on global photography. Every time a baby was born, a wedding was celebrated, or a vacation was taken, Kodak made money. The gross profit margins on their film and chemical business were estimated between 70 and 80%. 80% in the business world. That isn't just a profit margin. That is a license to print money. Now, look again at Steve Sasson's digital camera. If this technology succeeded, it would eliminate the need for film. It would eliminate the need for chemicals. It would eliminate the need for photographic paper. Everything Kodak depended on would disappear. The executives in 1975 weren't stupid, quite the opposite. They saw exactly what this meant. Digital cameras were consumer electronics, and the consumer electronics market is a brutal, low-margin bloodbath. Kodak was being asked to willingly abandon a monopoly business with 80% margins and jump into a fiercely competitive hardware market where profit margins were often in the single digits. This is what Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen famously called the innovator's dilemma. How do you convince a board of directors and Wall Street investors to cut your own throat today just to survive a hypothetical future 20 years from now? You don't. But Kodak's leadership knew film wouldn't last forever. The digital ghost was already in the machine, so they tried to pivot But they pivoted in exactly the wrong direction. Instead of trying to figure out how to survive on 10% hardware margins, Kodak decided they needed to find another industry that offered the 80% margins they had become addicted to. In 1988, they made their move. They spent $5.1 billion to acquire a company called Sterling Drug. Their thinking was almost deceptively simple. If you're experts in chemicals, maybe you can become experts in medicine. After all, how different could it be? It was a disaster. The cultures didn't fit, the strategy didn't work, and eventually, Kodak was forced to break the company apart and sell it off at a massive loss. The pharmaceutical gamble had failed, and the clock was still ticking. By the 1990s, personal computers were becoming everyday household machines. Kodak finally realized they had to build a bridge between the analog world and the digital one. So, in 1990, they introduced the photo CD. The idea sounded brilliant. You still shoot on Kodak film. You still pay Kodak to develop it. But instead of printed photographs, you receive a CD that lets you view your memories on a television or a computer. For Kodak, it was the perfect compromise. Consumers got a taste of the future, while Kodak protected the business model of the past. But markets don't care about a company's internal profit margins. The photo CD relied on a proprietary format. It was clunky, expensive, and inconvenient. Then, standard digital formats like JPEG arrived, simple, universal, compatible with everything. Almost overnight, the photo CD became an orphan technology. Kodak had bought itself a little time, but not enough. Because while they were trying to slow the future down, the future was accelerating. Kodak was running out of time, and the digital tsunami was finally hitting the shore. The year is 2001. The transition to digital hardware is no longer a prediction, it's reality. Sony, Canon, Nikon, they're flooding the market with digital cameras. The popular narrative says Kodak was asleep at the wheel, that they ignored the digital revolution. But the data tells a completely different story. Kodak wasn't standing still. They launched a new line of digital cameras called EasyShare, designed to be simple, intuitive, effortless. Dock the camera, press a button. Your photos were on your computer, and consumers loved them. In fact, Kodak didn't just enter the digital market, they conquered it. By 2004, Kodak had become the #1 seller of digital cameras in the United States. In February 2005, market research firm IDC reported that Kodak controlled nearly 22% of the entire US digital camera market. Think about that, Mark. They beat Sony, they beat Canon, they took the #1 spot. So here's the question. If Kodak was America's best-selling digital camera company in 2004, why did they file for bankruptcy just 8 years later? Because of the trap. Every EasyShare camera Kodak sold created a new problem. Every digital camera replaced a future film customer. Every sale destroyed another piece of the business. That had made Kodak rich. They were successfully cannibalizing themselves, trading an 80% profit margin for hardware profits that, in some quarters, were actually negative. Imagine that, selling millions of products and losing money on your own success. Kodak wasn't failing because people rejected digital cameras. Kodak was failing because people embraced them. The digital transition had finally arrived, but the economics of the new world could never support the enormous corporate machine Kodak had built over more than a century. And then, things got even worse, because selling digital cameras was about to become almost impossible for everyone. As the 2000s came to a close, everything changed. Smartphones entered the market. Suddenly, consumers didn't want dedicated digital cameras anymore. Not from Kodak, not from Sony, not from Canon, not from anyone. The camera had moved into their pocket, and Kodak's revenue went into freefall. They were burning through cash at an alarming rate. The film business was gone. The digital camera business was collapsing, and Kodak had only one truly valuable asset left. Not their factories, not their brand, not their cameras, their ideas, the patents they had spent decades building. Remember Steve Sasson and that prototype from 1975? Over the next 3 decades, Kodak quietly assembled a war chest of more than 1,000 patents related to digital imaging. The very technology they once feared had become their last lifeline. So Kodak went on the offensive. If they couldn't make money selling cameras, they would make money from everyone else who did. They launched aggressive patent lawsuits against some of the biggest technology companies on Earth, including Apple and Research in Motion, the company behind the BlackBerry. Kodak argued that key digital imaging technology inside these modern smartphones belonged to them. And surprisingly, they weren't entirely wrong. For years, Kodak had earned billions of dollars in patent licensing fees from companies using technology Kodak had invented. But there was one problem. Lawsuits move slowly. Bankruptcy doesn't. Kodak was hemorrhaging cash far faster than their lawyers could win in court. The patent strategy was never a comeback. It was a last stand, a desperate attempt to buy just a little more time. But the collapse had already gone too far. On January 19th, 2012, the Eastman Kodak Company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. More than 100 years of photographic history had arrived at this moment to secure emergency financing from Citigroup and restructure its enormous debts. Kodak was forced to sell its crown jewels, not its factories, not its cameras, its patents. The portfolio contained more than 1,100 digital imaging patents. The ideas that had begun with Steve Sasson's invention decades earlier. Analysts believed the collection could be worth as much as $3 billion. But the biggest technology companies knew something Kodak couldn't hide. They were desperate. So instead of bidding against one another, something unexpected happened. Fierce competitors became temporary allies. Apple, Google, Microsoft, Samsung, companies that normally fought for every customer, joined forces. They formed a consortium, not to compete, but to make sure nobody else could. In December 2012, the entire patent portfolio was sold for just $525 million, barely a fraction of what many believed it was truly worth. The story of Kodak is usually told as a warning about the danger of failing to see the future. But that's not what happened. Kodak saw the future. They built it, they patented it, and by 2004, they had even become America's #1 seller of digital cameras. The technology was never the problem. The business model was. Technological innovation is meaningless if your economic model cannot survive the transition. Kodak didn't fail because they lacked vision. They failed because they were trapped inside a business that was simply too profitable to abandon. Think about that. The very thing that made Kodak one of the greatest companies in the world eventually became the reason it couldn't survive. They weren't killed by the digital camera. They were killed by the 80% margin. And sometimes the greatest threat to a successful company isn't the competition outside. It's the success it's already built.